The recent Hearthstone balance patch led to shifts in the meta that weren't massive, but were definitely meaningful. The decline of former leaders pushed a slow evolution of meta decks in search of optimal builds, resulting in several unexpected experiments. Today, we've prepared a list of the best new decks along with effective upgrades for familiar playstyles.
Time to rock and roll!
Hello my friends, my name is Bot Mathematician and this is Holomancer.
Also, Chief Investigative Reporter Dora joined us this evening.
Gadgets and Gazette always gets the scoop.
As expected, this very modest balance patch did not fundamentally reshape the meta. Its effect is better described as fine-tuning.
However, the impact turned out to be positive. The drop in Druid's power level and the reduced influence of Shaman opened up a large amount of space for decks that previously felt pushed out.
At the same time, some controversial Cataclysm trends have solidified and become more established. But let's go step by step. The balance patch hit two Druid strategies at once. Imbue and Trent dealt a heavy blow to Herald Shaman, and nearly eliminated the Gladiator Warrior strategy. In addition, it slightly boosted Herald strategies for Death Knight and Rogue, and also strengthened Control Priest. This was enough to reignite player interest in these archetypes. Herald Rogue immediately became the new leader. Amid the changes, it was clear that No Minion Demon Hunter would not lose its effectiveness, and players began using it even more frequently to quickly reach legend rank. Herald Shaman's presence dropped by more than half, but players quickly realized the deck remained competitive. Control Priest and Herald Death Knight also entered the top 5 most popular archetypes, although their win rates were not impressive enough for high-level competitive play.
But within a week, several important developments occurred. Herald Rogue maintained its strong presence on the climb to legend, despite its overall win rate not being particularly impressive. Dragon Warrior made a significant leap, doubling its presence. No Minion Demon Hunter retained its effectiveness. Players are still trying to make Control Priest and Herald Death Knight work, but so far without success. The enthusiasm of the priests is gradually dying down. The biggest surprise of the post-patch period was the rapid rise of Merithra Druid. While the changes may not seem dramatic at first glance, they are significant from a gameplay perspective. The current state of the meta feels much healthier largely because the game has slowed down. The impact of aggressive strategies capable of winning by turn 4 has dropped sharply, and the strongest decks are not dominating, at least for now.
However, there is also a downside. The trend toward low diversity within classes is not only persisting, it appears to be getting stronger. Let's start with Demon Hunter. The class got very lucky. First, it became the main beneficiary of the balance changes, as it not only avoided nerfs but actually strengthened its position. Second, it has two competitive strategies for high-rank play, No Minion and Herald. This is a major achievement in the current meta. The No Minion strategy is significantly more effective and consistent, which is why its presence is 10 times higher. It completely dominates within the class. In my opinion, the deck has 5 key components that support its 58% win rate based on 6,000 matches. It is capable of dealing explosive burst damage at the most unexpected moments. Moreover, if the game goes long, the deck has access to a very powerful finisher. Another key element is resource generation. The deck has numerous discover options that allow it to adapt to different situations. Not every class can boast this level of flexibility. The deck also has access to unexpected healing through the weapon axe of Cenarius, along with tools that increase its damage. But most importantly, in my experience, it is relatively simple to play, making it accessible even for newer players. Additionally, the new meta favors this strategy. The weakened Herald Shaman is almost free wins for the archetype. Dragon Warrior is also a favorable matchup. The same applies to the buffed Control Priest and Herald Death Knight, whose popularity has naturally increased after the buffs. Even against Herald Rogue, the matchup is roughly 50-50. To improve your chances during the mulligan phase, you will usually want the Eternal Hold, as it provides consistent long-term value in the mid-game. A crafting priority of 80% indicates a very high priority for players looking to climb efficiently with limited resources. While the deck is not cheap, its performance justifies the investment. However, there is one notable drawback. Personally, I find the gameplay somewhat repetitive and not particularly engaging.
The most serious threat to No Minion Demon Hunter is Merithra Druid. The situation is further amplified by the fact that this deck rapidly increased its presence after the complete collapse of the Imbue and Trent archetypes. After the balance patch, the deck's performance hovered on the edge of competitiveness. But at some point, players simply added Wickerfon to the build, and the deck exploded into the meta. In our previous video, we predicted that Druid nerfs would not reduce the usefulness of this card. That prediction proved correct. What's most interesting is that Druids consistently underestimate this powerful card and are slow to incorporate it into their core strategies. The Merithra archetype is a ramp deck with combo elements, which means you can play Wickerfawn before turn 6. After that, in the mid-game, opponents often lack the resources to deal with it, and even when they do, it typically requires a heavy investment. Because of this, during the mulligan phase, you are not primarily looking for Merithra to activate its effect as early as possible, but rather for Wickerfawn. If you find it early, your chances of winning increase significantly, while the legendary dragon's ability becomes more of a late-game win condition. Felwood Trent is also an excellent opener in almost any situation. In addition to mana ramp, the deck's strengths include strong resource generation and life recovery through Underking. The deck contains many legendary cards, but among the non-free ones, you only need 2 legendaries and 2 new epic cards. In return, you get a win rate of around 55% on the climb to legend. Based on cost and performance, the crafting priority is 53%, which is a rather high rating. The most difficult matchup for this build is End of Turn Paladin. Against other popular meta decks, it remains competitive and often performs well.
Speaking of the best decks, we can't ignore the obvious elephant in the room. Herald Rogue became the king of the meta after the latest balance patch, with its popularity on the climb to legend approaching 25%. The main reason isn't the minor buff, but the fact that the deck finally has enough space to follow its core game plan. The archetype simply became a bit more playable. In terms of raw efficiency, it's far from the strongest strategy, but players enjoy it immensely and continue experimenting in search of the optimal build. Here is the best classic version at the moment. The idea of the deck is to control the opponent's board while simultaneously upgrading Herald synergies, followed by a sharp shift in priority toward finishing the opponent. This is definitely one of the most unconventional playstyles in the current meta. I really love this archetype for its non-linearity. You will constantly feel like you have powerful combo interactions in hand, but executing them is extremely difficult. The deck forces you to make tough decisions and accept necessary compromises. This effect is further enhanced by cards like Agent of the Old Ones. There are no bad cards in your deck that you can easily turn into a coin, yet the coin itself is incredibly valuable for activating combo mechanics. I also love Garona Halforsen, whose activation always comes with risk and trade-offs. The same applies to her associated weapon, the Kingslayers. In some matchups you simply don't want to give your opponent legendary cards, making it a dead card in your hand. A key core of the deck is Twilight Mistress, one of the strongest turnaround tools, with direct synergy with Naralex, allowing you to buy time and extend the game. However, since it doesn't destroy the opponent's board but instead returns it to their hand, it's often less devastating and less universally effective. Additionally, its high cost limits your flexibility. As you can tell, I'm in love with this playstyle and the design philosophy behind it. It's complex but extremely engaging. The only real drawbacks are the relatively high cost, 4 non-free legendaries and 4 epics, and the still inconsistent win rate. As the meta evolves, Herald Rogue is finding it increasingly difficult to compete with more efficient decks.
However, we also want to show you another, more niche variation that excites us even more from a gameplay perspective. This is a hybrid of Herald and Imbue strategies. The key difference is that you upgrade not only the Herald effect but also your hero power, which eventually starts generating discounted minions. Your main goal is to gradually upgrade both engines, gaining random discounted cards while maintaining board control. Maximum resource generation and high variability are the defining features of this deck. This build has several unique aspects. Thanks to Imbue synergy, you gain valuable healing through Resplendent Dreamweaver, which also functions as a control tool. Players have recently started integrating Twilight Mistress into the build, even though it wasn't part of the original version. This has become a trend over the past few days. From my experience, the most problematic opponents are Dragon Warrior and No Hand Hunter. The former applies stronger and more efficient mid-game pressure, while the latter simply doesn't give you enough time to set up both engines. This is the biggest drawback, as these decks are gaining popularity, which naturally makes your win rate less stable compared to other decks near legend rank. Because of this, and the similarly high cost, the crafting priority is only 35%. If your resources are limited, we do not recommend experimenting with this variation.
By the way, it's time to talk about Warrior. The class is one of the main beneficiaries of Cataclysm. After the removal of the Gladiator strategy, the class retained multiple variations of Dragon Warrior and Egg Warrior, both of which have been gradually returning to the meta. Having several viable playstyles is quite rare right now. For example, Rogue essentially has only one core strategy it is forced to experiment with. Within the class, Dragon Warrior is clearly the dominant archetype. Initially, it heavily incorporated a Herald core, but now players are increasingly experimenting beyond that synergy. An example of such experimentation is the new combo Dragon Warrior. This is an aggressive, tempo-oriented mid-range deck that pressures the opponent by consistently developing large discounted threats on the board, while also having strong control tools and an exceptional finisher. One of the highlights of the deck is the inclusion of Erupting Volcano, a highly flexible, long-term tool that can be used both offensively and as a way to control the opponent's board, preventing them from stabilizing. But the heart of the deck is its unique finisher, the combination of Grommash Hellscream and the location Sanguine Depths, which allows you to deal a burst of 12 damage in a direct linear way. Interestingly, this contrasts with Broxiger, which forces Demon Hunter to execute a much longer sequence of actions to achieve comparable damage. The deck has significantly less resource generation, instead focusing on multiplying existing resources and drawing cards from the deck. It also includes an important component for increasing survivability through health gain. This build performs well against slower popular decks such as Herald Rogue, Herald Shaman, and Control Priest, preventing them from stabilizing. Quest Mage is also an easy matchup due to the ability to directly destroy its win condition in the form of the weapon the Origin Stone. However, it does have unfavorable matchups, most notably Merithra Druid, which can build an overwhelming wall of threats. What truly sets this build apart is its cost. 0 paid legendaries, 0 epics, combined with a high win rate from Diamond to Legend, result in a crafting priority of 117%, making it an absolute top priority for players with limited resources. There is also another version that has become a trend over the past few days. In this build, players have abandoned the powerful finisher in favor of Chromie. Instead of burst damage, the deck focuses on pulling additional minions from the deck. This is quite unusual, as Chromie had previously been considered a completely useless card, despite her lore role as a leader who pulls heroes from different timelines. This version leans more heavily into aggression, resource generation, and card draw, allowing it to win even before turn 8, when Grommash would normally come online. And you know what? It actually seems to work quite well, at least judging by its high win rate. A crafting priority of 99% makes this build a clear crafting priority. Minimal investment, just one legendary, delivers maximum value on ladder. However, I remain concerned about Chromie, as her role in the deck feels experimental. It seems to me that she is, at best, an optional and easily replaceable card. The deck aims to kill the opponent as quickly as possible, rather than spending turn 6 purely on drawing resources.
An interesting detail. In our previous video, we discussed the usefulness of the new legendary cards, and tried to identify the most accurate predictor among popular community figures. During the reveal season, Clark Hellscream gave Ragnaros a very radical rating, suggesting it was only a 2-star card. If the trend of removing the Herald core from dragon archetypes continues, that prediction may prove correct in the long run.
Mage has almost disappeared from the meta. Players are trying to make both Quest and Burn archetypes work, but the battle for viability has so far been narrowly won by Quest, and this strategy is gradually becoming more prominent. This is the only viable build at high ranks. Its presence is extremely low, and its win rate fluctuates heavily due to a small sample size, currently sitting at around 52%. The deck is built around resource generation through Discover mechanics, making it highly flexible in adapting to different scenarios. However, it is also heavily reliant on luck, especially after completing the quest. If you are offered poor options, your chances of winning drop significantly. One of the most interesting aspects of the deck is that 2 previously considered useless cards, Kyuanzu and Morchi, have unexpectedly found a place here. The deck performs well against slower strategies such as end-of-turn Paladin and Control Priest, but struggles significantly against top meta decks like Dragon Warrior, No Hand Hunter, and Herald Rogue. At the moment, this build has a very low crafting priority.
The hybrid of aura and end-of-turn synergies in Paladin continues to dominate within the class. Although players have experimented with new approaches, this hybrid remains too efficient and explosive. Its win rate confirms this, as it features a high number of powerful interactions. One of the key synergies is enhancing end-of-turn effects through aura. It sounds simple, but in practice, it is more complex than it appears, as you must constantly react to your opponent's actions. This makes the deck strong but non-linear, which I personally enjoy. Crafting priority 73%. This is a solid rating. The deck is worth crafting, but keep in mind that for a Paladin deck, it is not particularly easy to play. Despite the dominance of this hybrid, players have managed to revive an aggro archetype in a competitive form. This is a classic playstyle where your goal is to flood the board with cheap minions and then suddenly buff them. Thanks to the abundance of early game minions, you will almost always have a strong opening, but your win condition relies heavily on a single key card. Flight Maneuvers is a shatter spell that summons 2/4 halves dragons and gives all friendly minions +1/+1 and Divine Shield. For this deck, the primary win condition is finding this spell early, so you can activate it by turn 4. The high number of early game minions makes this a realistic goal. If successful, you can establish an overwhelming board before the mid-game that is nearly impossible to answer. Because of these characteristics, the deck heavily punishes slower strategies but struggles against faster, more consistent tempo decks such as No Minion Demon Hunter and No Hand Hunter. The deck is extremely simple, almost to a fault. You only need one legendary card, making it a great crafting option. The only downside is that the Fins Beyond Time may not be particularly useful in other Paladin strategies, although it is excellent in token-based decks.
A few more words about strong archetypes that are not evolving but remain an important part of the meta. Herald Shaman recovered almost immediately after the balance patch, but it has lost its former dominance. At the same time, it remains the only real option for the class. Unfortunately, players are not experimenting much, and the playstyle has remained unchanged. Your main goal is to gradually build board presence while upgrading Herald synergy. This is why cheap Herald cards are exactly what you want to find in your mulligan. An important feature of the deck is the single copy spell Hex, which serves as a precise answer to key threats. As a result, the reduced presence of Shaman is one of the reasons X strategies are slowly returning to the meta. The downside is that the archetype struggles against Dragon Warrior and No Minion Demon Hunter. With a high cost of 4 legendary cards and a 55% win rate, the crafting priority sits at 45%. This is an average rating, a good choice if you already own key cards, but not an ideal investment from scratch.
It's also worth mentioning No Hand Hunter. Within this archetype, there is very little experimentation. Most players are simply deciding whether Glacial Shard deserves a spot in the deck, how many copies to include, or whether to cut it entirely. This is probably the simplest and most linear strategy, focused on dealing consistent damage to the opponent's hero while maintaining board presence. Since many meta decks have access to healing, this build focuses on killing the opponent as quickly as possible and excludes Gen, making it very budget-friendly. Outside of this strategy, Hunter still lacks viable alternatives. Additionally, players are somewhat reluctant to use it at higher ranks.
Other classes are also struggling with diversity. Herald remains the primary deck for Death Knight, and although the Unholy archetype appears more viable, players continue to ignore it. Control Priest is the only real strategy for Priest, and its low effectiveness causes players to gradually lose confidence in it on the climb to Legend. Warlock is forced to rely on an egg-based Herald core. After the patch, its win rate increased slightly, but not enough to make it truly competitive. Reform Warlock remains effectively dead, despite numerous attempts to make it work.
In conclusion, there is no explosive upheaval in the meta, but there are many small shifts, and the game feels different. Merithra Druid has emerged from the shadows and is rapidly gaining influence. Dragon Warrior is undergoing a transformation within its strategy. And finally, Aggro Paladin is one of the key discoveries of the post-patch period.
Overall, we have a very positive impression of the balance patch. We don't see any strategies that feel frustrating to play against. Even if such decks exist, their presence is minimal and they do not negatively impact the overall experience. Many decks carry the feel of the old Hearthstone, a version of the game that I personally enjoy.
At the same time, I feel that low diversity could become a problem in the coming weeks, and we have high hopes that the new class sets, replacing mini-sets, will increase variety, at least within certain classes.
Dear viewers, what do you think? What are your impressions of the meta after the balance patch?
Does the low performance of Mage and Death Knight affect your experience? How would you rate the current level of diversity?
Let us know your thoughts below and join the polls in your community tab. Remember to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon to support our content and stay updated.
Finally, we want to express our boundless gratitude to our sponsors.
Dear friends, your help is invaluable. We will be grateful for any support.
Okay, that's all for today. Thank you for spending this time with us. We really hope that we will have the opportunity to get in touch in the next video.
Take care of yourself.
And never give up.
Job's done.